Yeah, there were other processing going on, and the workshops were one of them in addition to the EIR processes and the council meetings that we did not review for this process. So, and the chair just used the word our charge was to critique, our charge was to analyze.
I made that up. Okay, sorry.
If we'd offered a critique, you might not have us here in front of you. So, but
I thought you were polite in this whole thing.
Well, I can't. I'm too hard to work with, and too opinionated, and too experienced not to occasionally offer something that could be judged as a critique. But our test was to largely analyze, but also suggest possibilities for change in the sixth draft, which is a beginning of foundation of thinking about how this work product could be changed. Can I look at the next slide on reliable water supply? Again, this chapter probably in its iterations, I actually did not analyze the number of comments by chapter, but I think chapters 3 and 4 were probably the winners.
In sheer numbers.
In sheer numbers, neck to neck, and intensity. And in the depth of institutional muscle, if you will. These are big organizations with big budgets and long histories that are poking at you here. So it's not that any individual's opinion is not also important, but this is there are lots of players with lots of big economic stakes in this issue, and they're vocal in their positions. So the comments are up there. About the conflicts, and one of the things that struck me, and this again is not unusual in other policy arenas, but essentially you have assertions of policy autonomy for the water world. People in a variety of ways saying we make the policy, and don't talk to us about it hardly. Or we may consider what you think, but essentially don't step on our role. And this came in a variety of languages, all the way from the very first letter from the Department of Water Resources, which talked about its mission, its responsibilities, and it hoped that the council would not impinge upon these. Two agents.
Are you suggesting that the Department of Water Resources might not find the language of statute on a common delta plan that will govern their actions totally acceptable?
I could never speak for any agency, not even this agency. So, but the point is that this is not unusual. This is not unusual in the creation of a new agency. The other, as I said in my preparatory comments, the other existing agencies have their statutory authority, their missions, their sets of programs, their sets of relationships. They want to get that work done. That's legitimate. Equally legitimate was the legislature passed the act, set in place a new set of modified set of policy goals, a new set of legal responsibilities, including language that says we expect, that things will change in terms of the actions of these agencies. So how do you get that to happen is important. But many of the comments in this area, or a number of the comments, reflect this drive toward policy autonomy. And then there's specific conflicts around specific parts of the Act, and two of them are particular flashpoints, or what's reliable water supply mean and what's reduced reliance on the delta mean. You've heard a lot about that. The fifth staff draft, just in broad terms, continues to have elements of the Delta Plan which address water supply reliability. It has recommendations for long-term management of water resources. It is down now. I don't have to go to specifics of how many policies and recommendations there are here. There are 3 policies or something. I have to look at my notes in a moment, and the rest are recommendations. But all the policies and recommendations in this chapter rely on the actions of other agencies, and that's an important feature of this policy, of this chapter. So this is a sort of an operational example of the character of your plan and of how you're exercising your authority. And as I said, the Act is giving you a set of authorities and a set of indirect measures, and they've been structured in a particular way in this draft. Talking about this draft singular, I'm talking about the fifth draft. I think that I'd like to point, with that broad context, only a couple of things here. One is that and this is I want to shift to something we're going to talk about a little bit later, performance measures started to come in the third and fourth draft. In the fourth draft, the drafts began to be group performance measures as administrator, driver, and outcome. As someone who's worked in this field for several decades now, the driver one is a little different than often in my field, but of policy. But the administrative and outcome measures, a way of thinking about it, is very common. The driver, I understand. It's important, as we'll talk about those later, that the administrative things are what organizations do. Sometimes those have dates established with them, but the driver and outcome performance measures usually are talked about in terms of progress with no specific timelines or targets, if you will, for what could be achieved. So I just wanted to note that got brought in here, and it's most evident. The first time I really saw it was in this chapter. The other thing that I wanted to note on this chapter is how the issue of flows are handled, which spills over into the next chapter we're going to talk about on ecosystem. Bob's going to take the lead in talking about that because he did the primary review. But this chapter went through a couple of iterations of how it talked about your request or demand that the State Water Resources Control Board establish flow standards, and what you ended up with was it is not a policy in this chapter. It's textual discussion of the importance of the flows, but it is not a policy in this chapter that the board deal with flows, and that comes to the integration issue. And later on, I think there's a framing issue of your role here and how you think about the co-equal goals that is evident in this chapter also. So those are the two things I wanted to flag at the specific level on that chapter. If we could shift to ecosystem. Or
Mr. Wilson, I know you're raising your hand, but we're hearing a staff presentation now. There'll be public comments on this section later.
I thought you were going to take public comments after each chapter.
No. This is a staff report to us, Mr. Wilson. We'll have public comments later.
Gotcha.
Thank you.